Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ron Griffin for artificialanimation.com and gameview.net. I'll be making a tutorial now on how to create a simple or slightly complex wallpaper with Cinema 4D and After Effects. In this tutorial we'll be covering sort of from the ground up how to recreate a logo in Cinema 4D. There's two ways of doing this. We can either import Illustrator files, or we can simply draw it out again. But we have this 24 or 2560 by 1600 resolution wallpaper here that I made just the other day, and I decided that I'd make two versions. And the slogan is "Keep it simple, stupid." That's Arch Linux's slogan, and so I thought I'd blend that into the background. It didn't take me very long to make this. It's definitely not my best work, but I thought that this would make sort of a productive tutorial for anyone wanting to learn a bit about splines, making 3D objects, and more importantly, making them look good in After Effects. That's not After Effects, sorry, Cinema 4D. That's always sort of the issue. Making the final render look good. So of course it looks different straight out of Cinema 4D. We'll be adding some color and whatnot in After Effects. And you may be asking, why don't I use Photoshop? But ultimately Cinema 4D and After Effects is what we'll be using in this tutorial. We won't be going into Photoshop. Simply because I strongly believe that After Effects can do everything that's needed here. And because I'm better in After Effects. I'm actually horrible in Photoshop, so we won't be touching that today. Okay, so before we start, I will tell you, for the lighting here, I did use greyscalegorilla's HDR LightKit Pro. Nearly everyone uses that nowadays if you're sort of looking for quick lighting without having to use global illumination. It cuts render times, it makes it just look good. I'll take you to the page. It's just greyscalegorilla.com. And yeah, here we can... this guy has some great tutorials as well, so that's definitely worth checking out. But at the store, you can see HDR LightKit Pro. And this is what we'll be using. It's $70, well worth it, but this isn't necessarily required. I will say I'm not the best in Cinema 4D. So this is, you can achieve the same kind of lighting on your own, but we'll just be using this because I find it simpler. So yeah, okay, so let's get started. We'll open Cinema 4D, and quickly I'll just show you the project file. So yeah, again, what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a 2D logo, an image or a shape, and we'll be extruding it in 3D space. We'll be making lines and vector based paths in Cinema 4D so that it can calculate all the 3D geometry. And there's two ways of doing this. So let's assume you have your logo. If we go to Google here, and I'll just type Arch Linux. If we go to images, actually let's add a logo there. We can see I have this image right here, and this is actually a really good image to work with because it's 12,000 dpi, so yeah, it's really high resolution, really good quality. You got so many pixels here per inch that it's very easy to track around. However, this isn't always the case. You might have logos that are obviously a lot smaller, and you might not have the source files, but it all works the same way because I'll be showing you how to draw around it. So we have some different versions here. I'll just be using the standard one. You can get the SVG format as well, but what I'll be using is a PNG. We'll use this to draw around. So first of all, you want to grab your image, and so now I've got it downloaded onto my desktop. And like I said, this applies with anything you want to extrude. Whatever it is, you want to just go ahead and get it ready, because this is what we'll be working with. So all we need to do now is we need to do one of two things. We can either have the Illustrator file. If it's your own work and you've made it all in Illustrator, you need to save it as a Illustrator 8 file, not later, because Cinema 4D doesn't read later than version 8 of Illustrator 8. So that's what you need to save it as, Illustrator 8. And then we can just go to File, open or merge. In this case, it'd be merge, and then we just import. Like for example here, we click open, and we get this little box. We click OK, and what that'll do is it'll import, the Illustrator file. But this isn't what I'll be doing. This is sort of the quicker way to do it. But what we'll be doing is we'll be learning a bit about splines in the process. So here we can have here we can see our logo. It's on the floor. We've got one softbox here, and yeah. So if we open the multiple viewports here and we look at front, you can see I have this in the viewport. I'll just go ahead and make a new project file here completely, and we'll start from scratch. So again, I'm going to use the front here to start. So here's the front, and what we want to do is we want to go to options and configure, and we now have the viewport front configure box over here, and we can go to back and we can select an image. So if we browse for an image and we find our little logo, we can click open, and sure enough it'll pop in, and you can change different options like the grid spacing and whatnot, depending on what you want to do, but that isn't really important in this case. I mean, you can also scale the image differently. An important thing to remember when you're working with splines and whatnot is that it does need to be drawn on a flat surface. So this is why we're working in the front viewport. I mean, we could draw a spline here in perspective, but it wouldn't be on a flat surface. Just to give you an example, I could take the freehand here, and it would be it would sort of just be slanted. It's not really flat. So with that in mind, you want to be using the front viewport here. So what we'll do is we'll start drawing around. This is a tedious process. That's why many people will probably just choose to import the Illustrator file. I mean, you can make vector paths in Photoshop just from an image. You can Google to find out how, but those methods are never as good as if you do this by hand. Let me tell you, just never as good. If you want the quality and if you want to be really close to your 3D objects, up close, then you need to get rid of this sort of pixel problem here at the edges. And the only way to do that I know of is to actually recreate it. So we'll start here, and what we're going to start doing is, you can use scroll to zoom in and out, by the way. And we'll just grab this B-spline tool here. So if we hold our mouse over here and grab the B-spline, what the B-spline is it basically just, it bends it based on your next move. So it makes it a smooth path. That's what we'll be using to draw around. Of course, we will have to create extra points in the edges in order for us not to have this sort of bending effect. We can of course right-click and make it hard, but that's fine. We'll just do it. We'll just do it the way I'm doing it. We'll start down here in the corner, and I'll just basically start clicking and make sure these are connected. By the way, as in you're not making. For example, if I click over here and I go back and I want to continue that, I'll make another spline here, which is not what you want to do. If that happens to you, and God forbid it probably will, all you need to do is hold A or tap A and then M. And we can see, or sorry, M and then A. And that brings up our create point tool. And then if we hold Control, after selecting our original spline, we can continue. But you need to hold Control. I'm sure there's a way around that, but like I said, I'm not the best. I'm not the best in Cinema 4D, so obviously I'm just passing on knowledge that I've learned. So we'll continue. We'll just basically I'm gonna sit here and draw around this entire A. So I won't bore you with that. I will go ahead and cut until I am finished drawing around our A in the Arch Linux, and hopefully you'll do the same. If you encounter any problems along the way, then I just recommend, again, using that create point tool and holding Control. And if there is an object inside of an object, as in, I'll give you an example. If we look over at the A here in Arch Linux, we'll draw around the A, of course. We'll draw around and complete the A, but then if we extrude it, we still have to get this circle out of it. You know, it will be flat here because we haven't defined this, so we'll have to draw around that and connect the object. But that's something I'll show you in a second. Just a quick note here about the corners. Like I said, we want to create a couple of points here because in the corners you can see it bends it automatically. And you can right click and make it hard, but this is just my method of doing it. I'll just create a few points there so that it's nice and smooth. And then I'll just continue. So remember, in the corners, sort of play around a bit and make a couple of points. That way you sort of get a smooth corner. So that if you zoom in or if you're really close to your 3D object, then you won't really see any hard shape, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut, and I'll be back when this A is masked out. Okay, we're back, and we are nearly connected down here with our 2 points. And what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and basically click on this. But as you can see, it creates too much of a sharp curve. So an easier thing to do here would be, and here you can see I've actually lost my point. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my create point tool, which should be in your history by now if you've used it, and with the spline selected, we'll control click. And a useful thing to know here is if you have the spline selected here, you should have an option to close the spline, and if we just hit that box, it closes it. But again, it's creating this sort of it's bending too much. So an easy way for us to just fix that is to come in nice and close. And here we have sort of, you can play around until you get the right kind of closure. And I'm happy with that, and there we go. One thing I will say, guys, is that this is one of those parts you actually don't want to rush. You should take your time on this because it will pay off later. If you have to go back and you know, change a bunch of these points, then it's going to be a real pain. But if you do need to change a point, you know, like let's say here I was going a bit quickly, not that it'll matter in this case, but just to show you, we have this live selection tool, and that sort of lets us select different points or multiple points at the same time. But we can click on this, and then we're able to move it. You know, we're able to move the points. And there's many different ways to add more points. You can round, and there's a bunch of different spline tools that you can use in this case. It'll make the job easier. And I've explained the ones that are needed in this case. But again, there are many spline tutorials. So about this A, obviously I won't sit here and well, select all of these letters here with you. But what I will have to show you quickly is this A, because as I said, if we just draw around, you know, if we just drew around this, I'll just make this really rough very quickly so you can see my point. If we drew around here and sort of close this off, what would happen is we would end up, you know, having a selection that doesn't necessarily include the center part of this A here. So what can we do to fix that? Well, it's quite simple. At this point, you know, with this setup we have here, what would happen is this there would be no circle in the middle. You know, it would just all be filled in. To fix that, we're obviously going to have to draw inside. So if I just drew a small circle, you know, inside. So now I have those two, but we're not finished yet because that won't actually solve our problem. What we have to do is we have to select both the A and this O, or the circle, should I say, and we right click and we connect objects, and then it creates a new object here. And we can go ahead and remove spline 3 and spline 1. And if we click on spline 4, it has all of our data. And what will happen now if we extrude this later on, it will keep this the center of the A here. It won't fill it in, so it'll actually look like an A. So if that's something that happens, you know, you've got a complex logo with loads of little pieces inside of it that you need to make, you know, to remove them. Then that's how you do it. You connect the two splines. So you'd first draw the outline, then you'd, you know, draw little details inside, and then at the end you might as well just connect all the splines depending on what you're doing. So that's how you sort of work around that. And what I'll do is I'll just I'll import my old project where I have all of this or just finished, so I don't have to mask all this out. Okay, so we'll be back when I've opened the project file. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and roughly imported the splines from the original project. Don't worry if it looks a bit strange here. You know, you can obviously see they're not lined up properly, but I didn't want to cut through this part because it's probably important that you see what I do next here. Once we've created all the splines for all the objects, as I explained just a second ago, this A here, let's see. This A here is one spline with both the circle, so they're connected objects, and to do that it was connect objects. You select two splines and you right click connect objects. But now that we have everything drawn out here, and you know you're happy with it, you don't have to make any more adjustments or anything. Now we can sort of start the fun, so to say. We'll go out of this front view here, and in perspective we can start working now. So first of all, I'm just going to separate these objects, because if you can see the Linux part and the arch and the actual A here, those are different colors. So to do that, we're going to separate them into 3 extrude NURBS. So first I'm going to select what I want as one color. So this arch text, I happen to know, needs to be sort of a grayish color. And what I can do is I can right click and group these objects, or we can just move them into an extrude NURB, but I'll just group them. And then we have the little trademark symbols down here, which we need to make sure we also get in there. So the A and the trademark next to it, right there, those need to be in a group. And then the rest should be, actually, what is this? That doesn't need to be there even. Then the rest can, actually it probably does. We'll just assume it needs to be there. All right, so we'll just select the rest. Now that we've got all that selected, we'll put that in a group as well. So now we have 3 groups. We have Linux, and we have the arch, and we also have the text. So from here, we'll go ahead and extrude it. So we'll make it 3D. So you come up here and you drop this down, extrude NURBS, and we'll take the Linux text first and we'll drop it in. And what we need to check in here when you select this is we need to check hierarchical, and that'll actually let it use all of the vector paths inside here. That's pretty important. Okay, so we have that, and we'll just go ahead and repeat the process really. We'll add another extrude NURB, and we'll drop the arch in there, check hierarchical, and we'll add yet another one, and we'll drop the arch text in there and check that. Okay, so now you can see we have our logo and our text, and there's no real issues here. You can see it's all smooth. We can get as close as we want without having to worry, which isn't always the case for imported files. Sometimes they're jagged in the edges, but like I said, if you recreate it yourself, you know, you're basically assuring yourself of quality work. So at this point, we can start actually making this look good. Now we have these 3 things here, but obviously we need more. We need to texture it and set up our scene. So to set up a basic scene, like we see here, we're basically just going to lay all of this down onto a plane, and we'll add a light. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to select plane, and that'll add a plane here. We'll take the scale tool over here, and I'll grab this corner here, and I'll just drag out. And that's fine. You know, it doesn't need to be that big. It doesn't even matter that much how big it is. But now that we've got these 3 extrude NURBS selected, you hold Control or Shift to select them all. We can just take the rotation tool, and if you hold Shift while you're doing this, it should snap. We need it to be, actually, yeah, okay, that looks good. And now we'll just move it up, and we can actually use a different view for this. We can use the right view. And you can see it's actually not perfect. Okay, we'll just lay it down onto the plane. It doesn't need to be making perfect contact with it or anything. It just needs to be roughly above it. You won't really notice that from a top-down perspective. When you're happy with that, we'll go ahead and start texturing the objects now. And then we'll proceed to adding light and then setting up our final render. So if we come down here, we can just double click and that creates a new texture. You should have this palette up. If not, then window and customization layouts startup, you can load that and it should be fine. So by double clicking on the new texture, we can go ahead and select the color. So here we'll choose a new color and we can use this feature called choose screen color. And so what I'll do is I'll open this again, and usually I'll do this with the original logo, but we'll just click this button and you can't see it, but I'm moving over to my other monitor. We'll select the color. Then we can click OK. And we'll also add some reflection here. Of course, we don't want 100%. That's a bit overkill. We'll put it down to something like 15. And so now we have our blue texture. And what I'll do is I'll just Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste that. And I'll make this one sort of gray. And again, I'll do choose screen color, and you'll get this, you know, the little eyedrop tool, and you can select the color. Oops, select it for reflection. Yeah, make sure that you're in the color tab. Okay, so now I've got my gray and blue texture. And I'll go ahead and put the blue on this extrude nerve on the Linux text, and I'll put this on the arch text, and we'll put blue again on the arch itself. So obviously if we render this out, it's not looking that great, but this is a big start. What I can do here, and what I have done in the original, is I've actually added a fillet cap. So if we select all of these and go to caps, start, and a fillet cap, and yeah, this is obviously too much, way too much here, but I'll drop this down, the radius down to 2, and yeah, in some cases this might work, in some cases it might not, but the idea here is to bounce some reflection off the edges. You know, we add more geometry, so that's why we want to do this. And now we'll go ahead and add a light, and you know, you can, as I said, you don't need the HDR LightKit Pro. You can, you know, use a light and set up. You can set up a bunch of different lighting options. You have them in Cinema 4D, but I will be using HDR LightKit Pro. So we'll go ahead and remove this. If you have HDR LightKit Pro, all you need to go to this window content browser, and then this will take something like 30 seconds to open. And then we just we'll select the softbox, and we'll just move it in. It doesn't really take much to make the edges pop here. We'll also use global illumination and ambient occlusion to add some more light. You don't need to use global illumination, but in this case I will, because it's just one frame. I'm not really worried too much about the render times in this case. But if you are making an animation, I wouldn't recommend global illumination, not if you're using HDR LightKit Pro. All right, so here, this is the content browser, and we can just drop this greyscalegorilla HDR LightKit Pro 1.5 down, and under, or if we just click on it, we'll have this selection here. And I'm gonna select softbox, double click on that, and it moves the softbox into our scene. And the softbox isn't exactly where I want it, so if we select the softbox, and if we just play with the rotation here, we can get it to where we want. I want the light to hit from the top, and I can increase the width a bit. What I like to do is the actual shape I like to put window, and a lot of people do, so kind of overkill, but yeah, that's how it is. So if we look now, we can see we're getting some shadows. Obviously, we're moving in the right direction, but still doesn't look the best. So what we'll do is we'll come down here, we'll put the area shadow quality to 100, and we'll go into our render settings, which is this button up here. We can change everything right here. So let's say I want to make it wallpaper. It's 1920 by 1200. That's my personal resolution. We'll make it 300 DPI, and Okay, that looks fine. Save, we can choose where we want to save it. So wallpaper, I'll just, choose desktop and I'll name it 1. Format, I'm going to be using PNG, and I'll check the alpha channel. That way the black becomes transparent. And that's all we need. We can, you can play around with different options, but that's all we need right now. And this is, I'm not using interlaced, just to let you know. Okay, so now anti-aliasing, we'll make it best, and 1144 will work fine, I found in this case. We can click this effect button, and we'll add global illumination, and effect, and ambient occlusion. And in some cases you may want to mess with the gamma and diffuse depth, mess with the settings, but in this case, the default is, for simplicity's sake and the tutorial, default is just fine. If we render this now, it'll take longer because global illumination is working. And then the ambient occlusion doesn't necessarily take that long, but global illumination, that does add render time. So we'll sit here and I'll cut once this first preview image is done rendering. Goddamn future wife texting me. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. All I'll have to do now is texture the plane itself, and I'll probably go into our softbox and turn the brightness down a bit. And earlier when we made it pretty wide, I'm gonna make it just a bit less wide. Okay. So we'll just we'll copy the gray material here. For the floor, and what I'll do is I'll make it a bit darker. And for the reflection, we don't want any. We'll just drop this on our plane. And the idea here is to sort of have a darkish background. We want the shadow to feel very soft and hit it just right. There's actually a preset, I'm pretty sure, in the LightKit Pro that lets you do this, but it doesn't really achieve the effect I want, so this is why we're building it manually. Now, what I'll do is I'll just double check. I saw the shadows are a bit icky. Okay. And we'll go ahead and do another render. Actually, before we do that, we'll put the ambient occlusion samples up way higher. And what I'll do is I'll actually position our camera before we render. So if we go here and hit the camera, it makes a new camera just as our perspective is right now. So I'll just sort of get the view I want, zoom in a bit. And this doesn't have to be exact at all. This is just sort of, this is based on how you want your text to be viewed and in what perspective and all that. We could go down here and give it a different look, but this is sort of like a wallpaper I'm going for. So, and what I'll do is I'll make this, I'll just do one more preview and then we'll render the file itself. Okay, and we're rendered. We can see the shadows look much better. Just last changes I'll do is I'll boost the blue just a bit to make it a bit more vibrant, and I'll also I'll put the cap down to 1 centimeter radius, and we can also at this point make it have a bit more depth. So in the coordinate part, sorry, in the object, we can go ahead and extrude it a bit more. Actually, we'll just go ahead and switch views, because when we do this, it'll sort of screw up our placement. So we just, over here in the object, I'll make it 40 centimeters. And then we'll just move it up, realign it with the floor. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm happy with it, and that I'll just render out. So as we selected our render settings earlier already, we can just hit the render button, and this will start rendering our final image in the final resolution you can see here. So again, I will come back when this is done rendering. Okay, we're back, and we've got it rendered out. As you can see down here, it took 5 minutes and 41 seconds for this one frame at 1920 by 1200. So yeah, I would definitely not advise using this setup for animation, but you know, this is a desktop wallpaper tutorial, so we'll continue on. You know, you can go ahead and save your project at this point. I'll just go ahead and save without quitting. And for the next part of the tutorial, we'll hop over into After Effects, where we'll make the final changes, but I'll let you see the final render. Here it is. You can see we've got some nice lighting, just bumping off our fillet cap. And we've got some nice shadows as well. So what I'll do is I'll make a second part for the After Effects tutorial, as this is becoming a very long tutorial. I had not anticipated. So I'll split it up into 2 parts. So hopefully I'll see you in the second part of this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And so yeah, click on the link and I'll see you in the next part.